A young black girl, barely 12 years old, walks up to the gate, ticket in hand and dreams in her eyes. But within seconds, a flight attendant tears it up, right in front of her. Why? 'Cause someone else looked like they belonged more. But that single cruel gesture, it didn't just ruin a moment, it lit a fire. Because this girl didn't cry. She made a call, and what followed sparked a $2.4 billion transformation across the entire airline industry. So who is she? What did she say on that phone call? And how did her voice rise above the engines, above the silence, and change the sky for millions? This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about what happens when the system tries to shrink you, but you rise anyway. Stay with us as we uncover a story of quiet courage, fierce dignity, and the moment the world had to listen. Like this video if you believe respect should never require a fight. Share if you think silence is no longer an option. And don't forget to subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Now, let's board the story. Phoenix Skyport Terminal Seagate 24. The voices around her buzzed like distant static. Laughter, footsteps, the occasional shout over the intercom. But Aria Monroe heard none of it. She sat alone in the middle row of pre-boarding seats, a weathered book in her lap and earbuds nestled in. Though the music had long since stopped playing, she wasn't reading. She was observing, always observing. Her mother used to say, "You don't have to be loud to see everything." Aria, quiet eyes catch the world off guard. At 13, Aria had already mastered that art. Her seat had been confirmed since last week. Seat 3A, window side, business class. The ticket had her name printed clean and bold. The QR code, scanned and verified twice at check-in. But somehow, it still wasn't enough. As the boarding announcement echoed overhead, Aria stood and moved to join the business class queue. Behind her, a man in a navy suit sighed, then stepped around her with a mutter. "Priority only." "Kid?" She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The gate agent scanned her ticket. It beeped green. The door opened. But the moment she stepped into the jet bridge, a sharp voice called from behind, "Excuse me." "You stop right there." The voice belonged to Trisha Lennox, a tall woman in a perfectly ironed Aerolux uniform, red lipstick, and a gaze like cold steel. Aria turned, ticket still in hand. Yes, Trisha looked her over. Slowly, top to bottom. "Where are your parents?" "Sweetheart, I'm traveling alone," Aria said calmly. Trisha frowned. "Unaccompanied minor program." "No," Aria said. "It's not required. My guardian signed off. It's in the record." Trisha didn't check any record. She reached for the boarding pass. Aria handed it over, still calm, still quiet. The paper barely left her hand before Trisha ripped it in half. No one boards without verified guardianship. You can't just wander onto business class with a child's ticket. Aria blinked. Once, people behind her gasped. One even pulled out a phone. Aria didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just stepped back. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid her phone from her hoodie pocket and opened a message thread labeled Uncle S. "You told me to only call if it got bad." It's bad. She hit send, then she sat, not in anger, not in fear, but in that heavy, cold silence that only children who've been humiliated in public know how to carry. Onboard flight ALX 2229, business class cabin. In seat 1C, a man wearing gray slacks and a muted brown sweater set down his coffee cup slowly. He was reading an article on his tablet titled Silent Discrimination in the Skies. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He glanced at the screen and read the message. Then he inhaled once through his nose and stood without a word. Silas Monroe, co-founder of Aerolux Airlines, turned and walked to the front cabin intercom. "Excuse me," he said to the flight lead. "I need to speak with the in-flight manager. Immediately. It concerns a passenger still at the gate." The attendant hesitated. "Sir, if it's about a 13-year-old girl whose ticket was just torn up by one of your staff." His tone didn't rise, but it hit like thunder. Back at gate 24, Arya sat with her knees tucked close, quietly scrolling through an old playlist on her phone. She didn't play anything. She didn't want to block the moment. She wanted to remember how this felt. Not for anger, for clarity. A new voice broke the silence. "Miss Monroe." She looked up. A man in a dark navy vest approached, flanked by a second crew member. "I'm Cole Brennan, the cabin operations lead. May I speak with you for a moment?" She nodded, didn't stand, just handed him the two halves of her ticket. He looked at them, his brow furrowed. He turned to the flight attendant behind him and muttered, "Tell her to pause boarding. Now." Then he knelt beside Arya. "I want to apologize," he said, "and to confirm something as your guardian. Silas Monroe." Arya met his eyes. "Yes." He stood, stiff. I understand. Thank you." He tapped his earpiece. "Activate Delta Red protocol. Passenger Monroe is to be escorted immediately. And locate Lennox. Now. Later." As Arya walked the jet bridge once more, the passengers who had witnessed the earlier confrontation parted in silence. She walked slowly. This time, she didn't need a boarding pass. This time, she was expected. And this time, everyone was watching. Not because she demanded it, because someone powerful finally did. 35,000 feet above the southwest desert. The cabin lights dimmed to a gentle amber. Soft piano music played faintly through overhead speakers, and seatbelt signs flickered off. Passengers leaned back, sipped their complimentary drinks, flipped through glossy airline magazines, and drifted into the temporary quiet of cruise altitude. But inside 1C, Silas Monroe couldn't relax. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the armrest, not from impatience but focus, precision, strategy, the way only someone who built a billion-dollar airline from the ground up would think. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed, and that was far more dangerous. Flashback 13 hours earlier, his penthouse office in Boston. "You're assigning Trisha Lennox to ALX. 229 Silas asked, glancing over a staff rotation chart. "She's efficient," the scheduler replied. "Senior level. No delays under her watch. Any complaints?" The man hesitated. "Some subtle bias reports. Never formalized. But the metrics say she gets the job done." Silas frowned. Metrics have a nasty habit of not measuring what actually matters." The scheduler said nothing. Silas circled the name Lennox with a red pen and underlined it twice. Present back in the sky. A soft knock on the cockpit door. The pilot opened it slightly and leaned out. "Mr. Monroe." "You requested direct channel access." Silas nodded. The pilot stepped aside, offering the auxiliary headset. "This gives you a direct patch to flight ops. Just say the word." Silas took it and said nothing. At first, he looked out the tiny window beside him into the great black stretch of night, clouds drifting like forgotten thoughts. Then he spoke, "Patch me through to legal. I want the audit logs pulled, full gate recordings, passenger reports, and locate Lennox manager, someone above in-flight ops. Pause, and have comms prepare a press response. No names. Yet. Meanwhile, business class cabin." Arya Monroe sat upright in her seat, a fleece blanket draped over her lap. She wasn't watching the movie on the screen in front of her. Her eyes were fixed on the reflection of the cabin in the dark window. All around her were adults, professionals in blazers, polished couples sipping wine, a woman reading The Economist with narrowed eyes. But none of them looked at her, not with cruelty, not anymore, but with discomfort, the kind that settles when a mirror is placed quietly in front of privilege. Arya turned the brightness down on her screen and reached into her backpack. She pulled out a journal, black leather, corners worn. Her name etched on the inside cover in gold foil. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, "Some people don't want to see you. Others refuse to look away once they do. But the most powerful ones, they listen, even at 35 feet." She closed the book. In the galley, behind the curtain, Trisha Lennox was sweating. Not visibly, not yet, but inside, her stomach twisted. The crew whispers had already reached her. "He's on the plane. Did you see the way he spoke to Brennan? That girl, she's his." Trisha gritted her teeth. She had spent 24 years building this career. 10 consecutive Flight Lead of the Year ribbons, 0 safety violations, and now, undone by one misunderstanding. But deep down, a voice whispered what she didn't want to hear. "You didn't just question her. You erased her. You assumed and acted. And now you're not in control, in the cockpit." Silas removed the headset. He stood, walked down the aisle. Passengers turned, some recognizing him from Forbes covers, some just sensing the shift in the air. He stopped beside Arya's seat. "May I sit?" She nodded. He took the aisle seat. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then he broke the silence. "I told your mom I'd look out for you when she took that posting in Geneva. She's going to be calling soon. Wants to hear that you're okay." Arya gave a small smile. "I'm okay." Silas studied her expression. "No. You're quiet. Not the same thing." She didn't respond. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was her original ticket, reprinted with a gold seal from the airline's executive board. "You won't need this again, but I want you to keep it, as proof." "Of what? That sometimes," he said softly, "the quietest voices rewrite the loudest rules." 2 hours into the flight, somewhere above Kansas. The seatbelt light blinked on again, not because of turbulence, but because the atmosphere in the cabin was changing. Not the pressure, the energy, whispers, glances, a sense of something unspoken becoming undeniable. Silas Monroe had returned to Seat 1C. He wasn't reading, wasn't sleeping. He was watching the cabin, every seat, every crew member, every unsaid tension in the air. Across the aisle, a woman leaned toward her partner and whispered, "Is that him? The CEO." Another voice added, "Did you see what happened at the gate with that girl?" The murmurs had become a low, persistent current. But in the rear galley, the current was rising into a storm. Trisha Lennox paced. Her arms were crossed so tightly her nails dug into her sleeves. Every time she heard her name in a hushed tone, her gut twisted tighter. She had led over 3,000 flights in her career. This one was unraveling. She tapped her crew tablet open, flipping through passenger logs, crew manifests, incident protocols, as if she could scroll her way out of consequence. Her co-worker, a younger attendant named Yvette, approached quietly. "Trish, the girl, Arya. She's really his niece. Everyone's talking about it. And he's pulled security footage." Trisha's jaw clenched. I followed protocol. She didn't look. She stopped herself. Yvette's brow rose. Didn't look what the silence that followed was long. Too long. "Business class, row 3. Arya sat with her headphones in, though she wasn't listening to music. The cabin was quiet enough for her to hear her own breath. In, out, measured. But her thoughts were anything but calm. Did I do too much? Was it better if I had just let it go? What would Mom say? She glanced at her phone. A new message had come through. Mom just landed. Everything okay. Heard from Silas. Proud of you. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wasn't going to cry again. Not here, not now. Up front, Silas tapped a message on his tablet. To legal, subject passenger rights violation file. A formal review. Build case summary under structural discrimination and public embarrassment of minor. Flag media risk level high. Internal audit to begin immediately. He hit send. Then he sat back and thought of his sister, of how she'd raised Arya after their parents died, of how she'd worked 2 jobs and still showed up to every science fair, every school play, every late-night hospital scare when Arya had asthma. He thought of the time Arya told him, at just 7 years old, "Sometimes it feels like grown-ups don't see me unless I'm perfect." And now, this. In the galley? Trisha Lennox was unraveling. She could feel it. Not just the embarrassment, the recognition of something deeper. She thought back to her own beginnings, the early days when passengers ignored her instructions, when male pilots called her honey, when no one believed she could lead a crew until she did it 100 times over. She had fought for respect, earned it, but somewhere along the way, she had started believing respect was a currency you could deny others to keep your own. She looked at her reflection in the galley mirror, eyes sharp, lips drawn. Who had she become in the cockpit? The co-pilot turned to the captain. "Command just pinged. Corporate wants a decision within the hour about Trisha." The captain glanced back. Decision. They're debating whether to suspend her mid-flight, make her step down from duties before we even land. The pilot sighed. "Damn. Back in 3A. Arya finally spoke. To herself. Softly. "I didn't want to be the reason someone got fired." A man in the row behind her leaned forward. He was in his late 60s, wearing a tweed blazer and a wedding ring that had clearly seen decades. "I saw what happened," he said gently. "That wasn't your fault. That wasn't about you. That was about something bigger." Arya looked up at him. "But I was the one it happened to." He nodded. "And maybe that's why you'll change something no one else could." Then overhead chime, a crew announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We want to thank you for your patience this evening. Due to a procedural reassignment, one of our in-flight crew will no longer be continuing active duties for the remainder of this flight." The cabin stilled, the curtain pulled back. Trisha Lennox, face pale but composed, stepped into the aisle. She didn't speak, didn't protest. She simply walked the length of the cabin past every passenger, past Arya, past Silas, and exited into the rear jump seat. Silas looked down at his hands. He felt no triumph, only necessity. Sometimes justice didn't feel like winning. It felt like finally doing what should have been done years ago. The cabin had gone quiet after Trisha's removal from active duty. But that silence wasn't peace. It was uncertainty. The stillness before a storm redefines itself. Back in the rear galley, Trisha Lennox sat alone. Her hands trembled slightly as she took a breath and opened her crew-issued tablet. A small, blinking icon appeared in the corner of the screen. Pending incident report, protocol. She was supposed to file her version of the event within the hour. But she didn't even know where to begin. Her fingers hovered above the touchscreen. How do you write down something you never meant to happen? She tapped open a new message instead. Not to command, not to her union, to someone she hadn't spoken to in over a year. To Lana Lennox, subject. I messed up. I know you said I only ever called when things were bad. You were right. That's probably why I haven't heard from you since Mom's funeral. But today, something happened. And for the first time, I can't spin it into policy or protocol or passengers being difficult. I looked at a girl, and I didn't see her. I saw what I expected, what I've been trained to expect. And I acted like a gatekeeper instead of a human being. And now, I think I just became the story, the one people point at when they say, "This is what's wrong with everything." Do you ever wish you could go back just 5 minutes? I do. She hit save to drafts. She didn't mean to send it, but somewhere, deep in the system, the cloud synced, and Lana received it anyway. Elsewhere, in seat 1C, Silas Monroe leaned forward. His body language was calm, but his mind was sprinting. His assistant, who had stayed behind at corporate HQ, sent him a secure message. We've traced the gate footage. Arya was standing in line appropriately. The moment of ticket ripping is clear. So is the facial expression of Lennox. Publicly, this is explosive. But if you want to shift from litigation to legacy, I have an idea. Silas read on. Let her talk. Let the world hear from her before the headlines do. Let Arya be the one to decide what story this becomes. He stared at the screen, and for the first time in hours, he smiled. In business class. Row 3. Arya stared at the in-flight map. It blinked with little dots, cities they passed, altitudes, temperature, meaningless data. But to her, it was proof the world was still turning. The people below them had no idea what just happened thousands of feet above. She took out her notebook. Not the phone, not the tablet, the paper one. It still smelled like the lavender hand lotion her mom used. She opened to a clean page and began writing, Dear whoever needs to hear this. Today, someone looked at me like I didn't belong, like I was taking a space that wasn't meant for someone like me. They didn't know my name or my story, just my face, my skin, my seat. But I'm not going to shrink. I'm not going to apologize for being here. I'm not going to carry their shame like it's mine. And if you're reading this and you've ever felt invisible, I see you. I hear you. We belong here too. Arya Monroe. She didn't know why she wrote it. Maybe she'd share it. Maybe she wouldn't. But for now, she just needed it out of her. Mid-flight in a quiet cabin office, the co-pilot received a live update from ground control. Silas Monroe has authorized a statement to the press post-landing. His legal team is pushing for a pivot, not just justice, but reform. He's requesting we retain full voice recordings, logs, and in-flight decisions for Transparency Initiative. The co-pilot raised an eyebrow. That girl, she's about to change everything. Isn't she? The captain nodded. Looks like she already has. Meanwhile, Trisha sat back, watching the seatbelt light flicker off again. She scrolled to her inbox. One new message. Lana Lennox. You finally said something real. Trish. I don't know if you're asking for forgiveness or understanding, but either way, I'm listening. And maybe now, others will too. She didn't cry. She couldn't afford to. But her throat burned with every breath. For the first time in 20 years of flying, Trisha felt more human off-duty than she ever had in uniform. In row 3, Arya handed the flight attendant a note. It wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. Just a folded paper with 6 handwritten words. Please give this to the captain. The attendant nodded and took it forward. Arya exhaled and whispered to herself, No more silence. Not today. We don't want a lawsuit. We want a reckoning. That was the first sentence of the press statement Silas Monroe typed in the notes app of his phone. No lawyers, no filters, no spin, just truth. He'd seen enough PR fire drills over the years to know that silence only gives time for others to rewrite the story. This time, the truth would speak first, and it would speak from them. Back in the rear jump seat, Trisha Lennox stared at her reflection in the emergency exit window. Was this how it all ended? Not with a dramatic trial, not with a TV special, but with a girl's quiet courage and a lifetime of unchecked assumptions collapsing in one public breath. She opened her crew chat. To FOI Internal Ethics Officer requesting formal review. I acknowledge protocol failure. I also wish to submit an unedited statement, voluntarily. She hit send. Her fingers didn't shake this time. In the cockpit, Captain Raymer turned to his co-pilot. Headquarters is lighting up. The board's calling this a pre-crisis pivot opportunity. Silas just made contact with the Department of Transportation. The co-pilot whistled. From headline to hearing in less than 48 hours. That's fast. Captain Raymer nodded. That girl. She started something. Back in row 3, Arya leaned into the window again. The clouds outside were soft, like brushstrokes. But inside her chest, everything was still, tight. She didn't want revenge. She wanted relief. To not carry the burden of other people's fears anymore. She whispered into her mom's voice recorder something she hadn't touched in months. Hey, Mom. I don't know if you'd be proud or scared. Maybe both. But I didn't back down. I didn't make myself small to make them comfortable. I finally said, I belong here. And I think. They heard me. 10 minutes later, a flight attendant came over. Ms. Monroe. The captain would like to invite you to the cockpit if you're comfortable. Mr. Monroe also sent a request. Arya looked up, surprised. Me, yes. You. She stood slowly. Her hands were cold, but her spine, straight as steel. As she passed other passengers, some nodded, not with pity, but with something deeper, recognition. They didn't need a headline to know what had happened. They'd seen it. And more importantly, they'd seen her. Inside the cockpit, Captain Raymer greeted her gently. Miss Monroe, I wanted you to know. I read your note. Arya blushed slightly. I didn't think you'd have time. Raymer smiled. When a 12-year-old speaks more truth in 6 lines than most politicians do in a year, I make time. He turned the tablet toward her. It showed a new initiative header, Project Wingspan, Passenger Dignity Protocol Pilot Phase, authorized by FOIA executive under it. Arya's note, her handwriting, her words, her heart. Your dad didn't push this. Raymer said. You did. Arya swallowed hard. I don't want them fired. I want it to stop. I know, Raymer replied. And this time, that might actually be enough to start something. Elsewhere, Trisha Lennox received a ping on her tablet. You've been temporarily removed from flight duties pending review. However, you are also being invited to participate in the upcoming Empathy-Based Passenger Training Summit as a guest speaker upon your acceptance. She stared at the message, and for the first time in a long time, she cried. Not because she was punished, but because she was finally being given the chance to become better. Later, back in her seat, Arya looked out the window again. She didn't know that her whispered voice note would be played, in full, during a congressional hearing on systemic reform in aviation just weeks later. She didn't know that the phrase, "I belong here," would become a movement slogan. She didn't know that Trisha Lennox would become one of the first whistleblowers turned reform advocates in industry history. All she knew was her voice had left her lips and reached the world. The plane touched down at O'Hare International, its tires hissing softly against the tarmac. The crowd didn't clap, but a silence fell, a reverent one, as if everyone aboard understood they had witnessed something larger than a single flight. At Gate B-12, camera crews had already gathered. Word had leaked Silas Monroe's daughter had been involved in a racially charged confrontation mid-flight. But that wasn't the story anymore. Because before any reporter could shout a question, the gate agent stepped forward holding a printed statement. She read aloud, "The Monroe family will not be taking legal action. Instead, we invite the public to join a national listening tour, beginning with the stories of passengers who feel unseen. We believe change begins not with outrage, but with truth." The reporters were stunned. No lawsuit, no press conference. That's when one of them noticed the small girl walking beside Silas Monroe. She didn't flinch under the cameras, didn't hide her face. Instead, Aria Monroe looked straight ahead. Inside the terminal, Trisha Lennox stood with a representative from FOA's ethics board. She hadn't gone home. She'd stayed, not because she had to, but because, finally, she wanted to face it. A young reporter from an independent outlet approached her gently. "You're Trisha." "Right." Trisha nodded slowly. "I don't want a gotcha," the reporter said. "But I think people want to understand what were you thinking in that moment." Trisha looked past the reporter, toward Aria in the distance. "I wasn't," she said. "I was reacting to training, to fear, to unconscious bias, to years of surviving in a system that rewards obedience, not awareness." She paused. "I thought I was enforcing protocol. But what I really did was fail to see a child as human before I saw her as a rule." Across the terminal, Aria sat down at a small round table. No stage, no makeup, no formal press team. Just a local podcast host named Gia Tran, who'd been tipped off by someone inside FOIA. Gia turned on the mic. "Aria, I want to thank you for being here. Most kids would have stayed home after something like this." Aria smiled shyly. "My dad wanted me to rest, but I told him, if they're going to tell my story, I should be the one to tell it first." Gia leaned in. "You have the room." Aria took a breath. "Everyone's saying this happened to me. But really, it happened through me. I was just the mirror. What they saw, what they assumed, wasn't me. It was everything they'd been taught to fear." Gia nodded softly. "And how do you feel now?" Aria paused. "Strong. And a little sad. Because I know it's not just me. There are kids, adults, who've had their tickets torn up in ways no one ever sees. Jobs, opportunities, safety. And no one believes them because they don't have a famous last name or a camera nearby." She looked up. "I want to tell their stories, too." The clip of the interview went viral in under 3 hours. Not because it was flashy, not because it was shocking, but because it was quiet, grounded, real. At FOIA headquarters, the boardroom filled with executives from 5 departments. They watched the interview on loop. And for the first time in a decade, no one interrupted. When the lights came up, the CEO of FOIA stood. "We're not going to get out of this with a donation or an apology. This is systemic." One executive cleared his throat. "We could start by reviewing the passenger profiling protocols. The way we're taught to flag discomfort is vague at best." Another chimed in. "We need lived experience consultants in training, not just HR videos." They looked at each other. Change wasn't just coming. It had already begun. Back in the airport, Arya hugged Gia. "Thank you," she whispered. Gia shook her head. "No, thank you. That wasn't an interview. That was history." That night, Trisha sat alone in her hotel room. She didn't sleep. She rewatched the interview 3 times. Each time, Arya's words pierced her deeper. Not with shame, but with an invitation. You don't have to be the person you were in that worst moment, but you do have to choose who you become after it. Trisha opened her laptop. She clicked into a new document and began writing the keynote she never imagined she'd be asked to deliver. What happens? When you finally see. The storm didn't come from the media. It came from within. By the end of the week, over 2,400 FOIA employees from pilots to gate agents had submitted anonymous messages through the company's internal portal. Some shared regret. Others shared fear. Most shared truths that had gone unheard for too long. We were told to trust our gut, but no one told us our gut might be biased. I flagged a black passenger once because she was too quiet. I still think about it. What if our training teaches us to survive lawsuits, not to serve people? They didn't want pity. They wanted permission to do better and a roadmap to get there. At the FOIA Training Center, a thick binder sat on the table in the conflict and de-escalation room. It had always been there. Gray, outdated, filled with vague language like identify risk cues and respond proportionally to passenger demeanor. Now, a sticky note sat on the cover, written in blue ink. It read, "Rewrite it. Start with her name. S.M." Arya Monroe didn't know she had sparked a manual rewrite. She was in the backyard with her dog, trying to be a kid again, at least for a moment. But even as she tossed the ball, her mind wandered. She thought about Trisha and what it must feel like to be defined by one moment. She thought about the other kids who didn't get cameras or interviews, the ones who got labeled as threats before they even said a word. Later that night, she asked her dad, "Why do people see someone like me as dangerous?" Silas looked up from his laptop, stunned by the softness of the question. He answered slowly, "Because they were taught to fear power they don't understand." Arya looked down. "But I'm not powerful." Silas reached over. "You are, because you told the truth even when it made people uncomfortable." He smiled. "And now they have to rewrite their rules because of you." At FOIA, a working group convened in a glass conference room. Trisha Lennox sat at the end of the table. She wasn't leading. She was listening. Across from her sat a young flight attendant named Mason Ortiz, who nervously adjusted his badge. "Last year, I flagged a teenager just because he had headphones in and didn't make eye contact. He looked a lot like my cousin, but I thought I was doing the right thing." Trisha nodded slowly. "What would you do now?" Mason's voice cracked. "I'd ask myself if my fear was mine, or someone else's they passed down to me." The group didn't speak for a moment. Then Trisha opened the old manual. She turned to page 47, the infamous discomfort indicators section. "I want this replaced," she said. "Not edited, rewritten, from a passenger's perspective." She looked around the room. "And I want to bring Arya Monroe in to help us write it." Back in Arya's bedroom, she sat cross-legged on the floor, rereading a letter from a girl in Atlanta. "I'm 14. I watched your interview with my mom. She cried. She said she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to say what you did. So, thank you." Arya folded the note carefully. Then her phone buzzed. It was an email from FOI. Subject Manual Redesign Invitation. "We believe policies shape people, and people, when seen, shape policies. Would you join us in shaping the new training language from a passenger's view? Sincerely, Trisha Lennox. Arya stared at the screen. Not long ago, that name made her chest tighten. Now, it made her curious. Not just about redemption, but about rebuilding. She typed a reply. I'll do it, but only if you promise to listen, like really listen. No defensiveness, just honesty. Arya. 3 days later, Arya sat in a training room with 3 former passengers, 2 sociologists, a trauma-informed care expert, and Trisha. The whiteboard read Language Audit Phase 1. The room wasn't fancy, but it felt sacred. Arya raised her hand. On page 5, instead of monitor unusual attire, can we write? Note context and avoid assumptions rooted in stereotype. Everyone nodded, except one exec, who hesitated. That's a bit academic. Trisha spoke gently. It's only academic to those who've never been followed in a store. The room fell silent again. Then the exec nodded. You're right. We keep it. By the end of the week, the first 30 pages had been rewritten, and a new name appeared on the draft's cover, Passenger Dignity and Bias Prevention Manual, with special acknowledgement to Arya Monroe. Age 12. Somewhere, a flight was taking off, and somewhere else, another ticket was being printed, but in a quiet room. A girl and a former flight attendant rewrote the words that would shape the way every future traveler would be seen. Not as risks, not as rules, but as people. Captain Raymer hadn't slept well. He'd flown 3 more legs since the incident. Each time he entered the cockpit, the silence behind the curtain felt heavier. His hands followed protocol, but his mind kept circling back to row 3, seat A. He hadn't ripped a ticket. He hadn't raised his voice, but he had watched it happen and done nothing. That's the part no manual could train you for. What to do when silence is betrayal. Back at headquarters, the Reform Committee was preparing a follow-up segment with Arya for FOIA's internal communications team. It would highlight changes in process, language, and future commitments. Arya was calm, focused, until she heard a voice behind her. Arya. She turned slowly. Captain Raymer. His uniform was perfect. His voice less so. I asked if I could speak with you privately, just for a moment. She blinked. Okay. They stepped outside the conference room, onto a quiet mezzanine balcony that overlooked the terminal concourse. For a minute, he didn't speak. Then he did. I'm sorry. Not scripted, not corporate. Just those 2 words. Quiet. Heavy. I saw what happened that day. I didn't stop it. I thought it would escalate if I interfered. And maybe it would have. But he hesitated. Maybe silence escalates things too. Just differently. Arya's arms were folded, but her expression softened. You're the captain, she said. Everyone listens to you. He nodded. That's the problem. I let them listen. To the wrong thing. Arya looked down. I thought about saying something. She whispered. But I didn't think anyone would believe me. He looked right at her. They will now. The moment didn't erase the past, but it marked something. A captain of a plane, of a system admitting he wasn't above accountability. Later that day, Arya walked back into the committee room. Trisha Lennox raised an eyebrow. You okay? Arya nodded. I think he meant it. Across the country, news outlets picked up the growing wave, not just about Arya, but about the people changing behind the scenes. Pilot issues public apology for inaction. Flight attendant invites passenger to rewrite manual. Airline reform, headed by 12-year-old's words. In Arya's middle school classroom, her teacher paused math homework to put up the headline. The class burst into applause, but Arya, even through a screen, just gave a small wave. She wasn't chasing fame. She was chasing change. And change didn't clap back. It listened, then moved. That night, Captain Raymer made a video, not for the press, for his pilots. If you're flying today, remember this. We're not just getting people from one place to another. We're showing them who we are between those places. And sometimes, who we are is the difference between someone feeling safe or scared. Let's get that part of the job right. 2. The video went viral, not externally, but inside every FOIA flight crew group chat. Raymer's inbox overflowed. Some praised him. Some questioned him. One simply wrote, "Thank you. Now I don't have to feel alone if I say something next time." Meanwhile, Arya returned to her quiet life. Sort of. Her father took her for ice cream after one of the final review sessions. They sat on a bench near the terminal, where it all began. "You did more than most adults ever do," Silas said. Arya smiled. "Honestly, I just wanted my seat back." He laughed. "Well, you got a lot more than that." She licked her cone. "Yeah, but I think it's worth it. Somewhere above, a plane soared. This time, with passengers who'd never know her name, but they'd feel something different. A kindness, a pause, a choice made with more care. That was the quiet legacy she never asked for, and somehow, exactly the one she left. It didn't take long for the winds to change. Within 72 hours of Captain Raymer's internal video and Arya's continued involvement in rewriting FOIA's manual, something else landed on CEO Adrian Sloan's desk. A single-page letter. No header, no signature, just bold black text. "We've invested billions. You've given the microphone to a child. Time to remember who writes the checks." Below that, a forwarded thread of emails from FOIA's largest shareholders. They weren't happy. Sloan sat in silence, turning the paper over. She was no stranger to investor pressure. She'd once fired 2 board members to secure a merger. But this was different, because this wasn't about performance. It was about principles. And suddenly, they were being called inconvenient. In the next board meeting, Chairman Luther Bragg cleared his throat before he spoke. "I think we all admire the heart behind what's happening, but let's not pretend that headlines equal stock stability." Sloan kept her voice even. "So you're suggesting we slow the reforms down? I'm suggesting we stop handing the narrative to a 12-year-old with a TikTok following." The room chuckled. Sloan didn't. Across town, Arya sat at her desk, writing a school essay titled "When You Tell the Truth." People get loud. She wasn't on social media. She hadn't read the headlines, but Silas had, and they worried him, not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't say. Meanwhile, Trisha Lennox got a calendar invite she wasn't expecting. Private strategy session. Attendees: Adrian Sloan, Luther Bragg, 2 PR consultants, and, oddly, herself. When she entered the room, she felt it. That slow-churning discomfort that comes when progress becomes a PR problem. Sloan didn't waste time. "Trisha, we need to prepare a pivot message." From what? From a story about individual emotion to one about policy alignment. Less personal, more strategic. Trisha frowned. Arya isn't a narrative. She's a person. Luther folded his arms. One who started costing us leverage. Back at home, Silas closed his laptop slowly. He'd just received an anonymous tip through an old contact in corporate legal. They were planning to phase Arya out, quietly, strategically, internally branded as de-escalation. That night, Silas told Aria. She didn't cry. She sat very still. And then she asked, "So do we fight louder or smarter?" The next morning, FOIA HQ received a press request from the Atlantic. Their investigative feature would be titled, "When Airlines Fear Little Girls: The Cost of Corporate Image Over Truth." It cited internal sources, anonymous memos, and somehow had quotes from both Trisha and Silas. Sloane slammed her office door shut and screamed into her sleeve. It was too late. The story had outgrown the script. At the next emergency board call, Trisha Lennox was asked to join. Again. But this time, so was Aria. And she didn't come quietly. She entered the glass conference room in jeans and sneakers, her braids tied back, a soft pink notebook under one arm. Luther didn't look up. Adrian did. "Aria, thank you for joining us." Aria nodded. She pulled out a folded paper. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a demand. It was a quote. She read it aloud. "Sometimes, telling the truth doesn't make you the hero. It makes you the inconvenience. But without the inconvenient, systems stay comfortable and people stay invisible." She looked up. "I'm not asking for attention. I'm asking for accuracy. Because the flight crew saw me as a threat. And no stock price should justify keeping that okay." The room froze. Then Adrian Sloane did something no one expected. She turned off the recorder and said, "I agree." Luther blinked. "You what?" Sloane looked at Aria. "We've catered to comfort long enough. Let them sell their shares. We'll buy back our spine." The vote that followed wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. FOIA's $2.4 internal reformation program would proceed, publicly, permanently, with Aria Monroe as its voice, not its accessory. That night, Aria asked her dad, "Did we win?" Silas smiled. "Truth isn't a trophy, baby. It's a torch. And you just carried it through a boardroom full of matches. The skies didn't look different, but they felt it. From Denver to Detroit, Boston to Baton Rouge flight crews opened their new company tablets and saw it. FOIA directive. 12.4b, the Monroe Amendment. It was short, simple, and for some, uncomfortably direct. Effective immediately. No passenger, especially children, may be moved, removed, or reprimanded without recorded cause. Executive review and full situational debrief. But it didn't stop there. Each aircraft must carry an on-duty liaison trained in bias de-escalation, cultural fluency, and inclusive response. No exceptions, no discretion, every flight, and at the top, a bold header. Because silence is not neutral. It's complicity and comfort. The memo wasn't signed by the CEO. It was signed by Aria Monroe, 12 years old, first passenger in company history to author a standing policy. The reform wasn't just words. It was uniforms redesigned for comfort and approachability. It was in-flight announcements rewritten to acknowledge all demographics. It was training simulations, where crew had to walk through Aria's exact scenario and get it right. Some employees pushed back. "Are we flying a plane or solving society?" one union rep posted online. But thousands of others shared stories of what they hadn't said, moments they hadn't stopped, faces they still remembered. And slowly, like altitude adjusting, the culture shifted. Captain Raymer, back in the air, changed his welcome address. He didn't say "ladies and gentlemen" anymore. He said "good afternoon, travelers, whoever you are, however you show up, we're honored to fly with you today." The passengers clapped. He wasn't fishing for applause. He was anchoring a truth at a layover in Portland. Trisha Lennox stepped into a break room packed with murmurs. Crew had just watched the new policy video. Some looked skeptical. One young attendant said quietly, "Do we really need all this? Like, it was one mistake." Trisha walked over, calm, clear. "No," she said, "it wasn't one mistake. It was one moment that revealed hundreds of silent ones behind it. This policy doesn't fix everything, but it tells the truth out loud so no kid ever has to do it alone again." The room fell quiet. Then someone clapped, then another, then everyone. Meanwhile, Arya returned to school. At first, she thought she'd be treated like a hero, but middle school wasn't a movie. Some classmates avoided her. Others teased. One girl sneered, "Must be nice having a whole company kiss your shoes." Arya didn't yell. She didn't cry. She turned and said, "They didn't kiss anything. They just finally looked." Her teacher gave her a copy of the policy, framed, not for vanity, but for clarity. So every time Arya looked at it, she'd remember she rewrote more than rules. She rewrote the ceiling. Silas Monroe, watching his daughter navigate both the clouds and the cafeteria, felt something he hadn't in years. Hope that maybe the world wasn't unchangeable, that maybe resistance wasn't about rage. Maybe it was about showing up again and again until they couldn't unsee you. At FOIA's national headquarters, an emotional ceremony took place. Adrian Sloan, CEO, stood beside Arya as the policy plaque was mounted in the main atrium. Reporters waited. Cameras flashed. But Arya stepped up to the mic, composed. She didn't thank the company. She didn't perform. She simply said, "To anyone who's ever been made to feel small just for being themselves, you're not too much. They were too little. Now they know better. So let's make sure they do better." In the weeks that followed, Arya received over 900 letters from passengers, from pilots, from young girls with braids like hers, writing in crayon, "You made the plane safer for me." And on one particularly quiet evening, Arya stood on her porch with Silas, watching planes draw lines across the sky. "Do you think it'll last?" she asked. Silas looked up. "I think it started, and sometimes that's enough. Because before there's change, there's a voice. And now, her voice flew with every flight. Change rarely comes without pushback. And though the skies looked clear, clouds were building behind the curtain. In the shadows of Foy's polished progress, certain crew members, ones who'd nodded in meetings, but clenched in silence, were gathering in digital corners, private forums, encrypted threads. They called it flight freedom. Their slogan, "We fly planes, not politics." And beneath their posts, a message repeated over and over, "Monroe was the match. Time to smother the spark." It started small. A passenger with braids like Arya's was asked twice for ID when boarding. Another young girl was told her seat had been upgraded but moved to the back. Then a report of an internal training video being accidentally deleted in a regional hub. These weren't accidents. They were tests to see if the fire would burn without Arya present. Trisha Lennox heard about it first. A junior attendant messaged her privately. "I overheard someone say, 'We'll outlast this PR circus.' He works midnight shifts in logistics. Should I say something?" Trisha stared at the message for a long time. Then she replied, "Yes, but not to me. To HR, to compliance, and if they ignore it, go to the press." Because this wasn't a story anymore. It was a system fighting for its old self. Meanwhile, Arya felt it, too. The silence in hallways that once cheered her, the news outlets that moved on to new drama, and worst of all, a plane. One afternoon, Arya and Silas boarded a FOIA flight to Atlanta for a youth leadership summit. At the gate, The agent scanned Arya's ticket and paused. The smile froze. Looks like your seat was reassigned. Silas leaned in. Why, no idea. Just a note that she was moved for cabin balance. Common with full flights. Arya looked behind the agent, saw rows of empty seats in business class. She knew, she saw. They sat in coach, middle seat, no complaints, no confrontation. But inside, Arya folded in on herself, and Silas watched it happen. His daughter, once bursting with belief, now shrinking beneath subtle sabotage. When the seatbelt light came on, she whispered, "They're waiting for me to brake." Back in FOIA HQ, Adrian Sloane's office received an internal audit. It flagged rising reports of minor infractions dismissed at the gate level. No suspensions, no warnings, just handled internally. Sloane picked up the phone. "Get me compliance. I want full names. I want every training skipped. And I want to know who deleted that video in Salt Lake City." The answer? An employee named Brent Hallard, a 17-year FOIA veteran, praised for punctuality, never disciplined, until now. The next day, Sloane made a decision. She wouldn't hold a press conference. She wouldn't write a blog. She'd book a ticket. Same seat as Arya's. Same route. Same gate. No staff escort. No advance notice. When the agent smiled and said, "We've moved you for balance," Sloane held out her badge. "CEO. Noted. You're now under formal review." News broke. Leaked photos. A CEO flying incognito and catching sabotage in action. FOIA released a single-sentence statement. "Our skies will not be divided between policy and practice. That era ends now," and that night, in a hotel room above Atlanta's skyline, Arya sat beside her dad, her voice small. "I thought if I did everything right, they'd stop seeing me as wrong." Silas turned toward her. "No, baby. They just started seeing you as powerful. And not everyone knows how to meet power with peace." He paused. "But that doesn't mean you stop." Arya looked out the window. The skyline blinked. And then she whispered, "Then I won't." Sometimes, turbulence isn't a sign of failure. It's proof you've left the ground. The sky over Washington, D.C. was silver that morning. Not stormy, just still, like it was holding its breath. Inside the Capitol's historic West Wing, mahogany chairs lined a private chamber. Media weren't invited, but Arya and Monroe had a seat at the table, right beside the Secretary of Transportation, and directly across from the CEOs of the 5 largest U.S. airlines. She didn't wear a suit. She wore her mother's sky blue cardigan, the one with sleeves too long, because this wasn't about power. It was about memory and the millions of small moments that go unseen. Silas sat in the back row, his eyes shining but steady. He remembered the look on Arya's face when her ticket was ripped. He remembered the silence of that aisle, the fear that his daughter's identity would always be something to manage, not celebrate. Now, she sat with people who could change the laws she once thought untouchable. The secretary opened the session. "Today we consider formal integration of the Monroe Protocol into national aviation standards." A pause. Then Ms. Monroe, "The floor's yours." Arya stood slowly. She looked down at her speech, then closed the folder. "I had something prepared," she began, "but I don't want to give a speech, because if you still need convincing, words won't do it." She looked each executive in the eye. "I want to tell you what it feels like when the world tells you that you are the disruption, when you're not given the benefit of the doubt, only the burden of disproving assumptions. I didn't want revenge when my ticket was ripped. I wanted respect. And I don't think that's too much for a child to ask at 30,000 feet. Her voice didn't tremble. It resonated like steel wrapped in silk. And I don't want this to be a moment. I want it to be a marker. So one day, when my kids fly, they won't even know what I'm talking about. Because they'll live in the future we decided to build today. The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Not a politician, not a press aide, a pilot. Captain Raymer, now head of a national crew coalition, stood and said, "I've flown for 23 years. This is the first time I've seen the future come from a passenger." Then all in favor of adopting the Monroe Protocol as a federal standard, every hand went up, even the skeptical ones. That evening, as the sun bled behind the Capitol dome, Arya and Silas walked along the reflecting pool. "You didn't just write a rule," Silas said softly. "You changed the altitude for everyone." Arya looked up. "I just wanted to feel safe on a plane." He smiled. "And now, thousands of others will, because you didn't accept less." Back at FOIA HQ, a new plaque was installed near the employee entrance. It read, "Every flight carries more than passengers. It carries people with stories, with scars, with strength. See them, hear them, protect them, and underneath." In elegant script, Arya Monroe. Months passed. Arya returned to school. Her classmates no longer teased. One day, a younger girl stopped her in the hallway. Shy. "You're that girl." "Right." "From the plane?" Arya smiled. "I guess so." The girl looked down. "My aunt said you saved her job." Arya blinked. Wait how she said she was gonna quit. That it was too hard being the only black flight attendant at her base. But then your story came out, and now she trains the new ones. In that moment, Arya realized something. Sometimes the ticket isn't just to a seat. It's to a stage, a story, a spark. And once you light that spark, you never know who else will see the sky differently. Later that year, Silas and Arya took a trip to California. Same airline, same gate, different experience. The agent smiled and said, "Welcome, Ms. Monroe. Your seat is ready and so is your legacy." And as they boarded, a flight attendant leaned in and whispered, "Thank you. Arya, you didn't just board the plane. You helped us all take off." She was just a girl. No spotlight, no podium, only a torn ticket and a truth that couldn't be ignored. But in a world that tried to seat her in silence, Arya Monroe chose to speak. And that one call, it didn't just reclaim a seat. It shook an entire industry. It forced leaders to face the cracks they'd long ignored. It proved that dignity doesn't wait for permission, because racism doesn't always come wearing a slur. Sometimes it's in a smirk, a silence, a policy. And sometimes it rips up a child's hope right at the gate. But Arya didn't just survive the flight. She rewrote the flight plan. And maybe that's the message for all of us. Don't underestimate the quiet ones. They carry the storms that shift the sky. As you take your next flight or your next step, remember this story. Carry it with you. Share it forward. If it moved you, like this video so more voices are heard. Share it because silence never changed a system. Subscribe for more stories that challenge, uplift, and refuse to look away. And until the next journey, fly with courage, speak with purpose, and never let anyone tear up your worth.